Vesper rushed from the dark corners of Lilith's mind, channeling a torrent of power through her soul so bright it made the sun look dim by comparison. Returning to the forefront of their combined consciousnesses, she was shocked to find that Jufari had somehow recovered, and now the two of them were locked in a titanic struggle. Lilith hurling cobalt bolts of lightning, while Jufari deflected with a shield pulled together from wisps of shadow, sending lightning arcing wildly in all directions. "That is enough, Mother," said Vesper, feeling strangely calm while floating in a well of power. Vesper. Again, how? She stammered, her attacks against Jufari suddenly forgotten. "It doesn't matter, I will take control once more." "You will do nothing, Mother," said Vesper, using Lilith's own knowledge that now filled her mind to wrest control of her limbs. Grasping at the threads of dark energy Lilith had been using, she combined it with the brilliant torrent of power that until now lay dormant in her own blood. With a finesse she didn't know she had, Vesper poured the energy through the image of the baobab tree that Magda had tattooed on her chest, using it as a focus for the raw power she was holding. "Your time was over long ago, Mother. You failed, you died. And I won't let you destroy my life the way you did yours. Foolish girl. Don't you think I've planned for everything, every contingency, even death," said Lilith. "Your life is my life. The only reason you exist is because I willed you into existence. Through you and the others, I will have all the time I need." "Others?" she asked, her brows coming together. "It does not matter. You're not real, just bits of bone and blood I weave together for my purposes." Vesper hesitated, stung by her mother's words, and control of her limbs slipped once more, her arms falling limp, legs wobbling like they were made of rubber. In front of her, Papa Jufari narrowed his milky gaze, looking for some tricks to why she had stopped attacking and now stood stock still, his chest heaving like he had just run a race. "No!" shouted Vesper, the words exploding from her lips and echoing across the barren plain. "I'm real and don't care what your plans were for me or anyone else. It's my life, and now I'm taking it back." Drinking in from the well of power she had created, Vesper drew on the knowledge she had found in Lilith's mind, weaving together strands of light and dark, layering the energy of life and death into an impenetrable weave to bind the vile creature that was once her mother, driving her consciousness behind an impassable wall that would hold her for all time, a prison deep within Vesper's mind, body, and soul. "What are you doing?" shouted Lilith, her voice fading with each passing moment, muted by the forming barrier that held her in place. "What is this? Let me out. Let me go." In front of her, Jufari smiled to himself, beads of sweat leaving rivulets down his white-painted face. She staggered when her mother threw her will against the barrier, pounding at the cage with all her strength, hunting for weakness like a cornered rat scrambling for some way out. Drawing deeper, Vesper reinforced the prison, building layer after layer until her mother's blows were little more than an annoyance, her screams only a faint buzzing. Seeing her distracted, Jufari drew back his arm, and a shadowy spear appeared in his hand, his milky gaze hard and unblinking. Like a lion springing from the tall grass, his arm snapped forward, aiming the dark weapon at her chest. Vesper saw it all happening, her attention never wavering from the treacherous Sandaway, despite her internal battle with her mother. She saw the spear released and drew once more on the well of knowledge and experience she had taken from Lilith's mind. With a flick of her wrist she caught the simple weapon in thin strands of power, and then did the same thing to Papa Jufari, holding them both in place. "My mother was right," she said to herself, as much to the wide-eyed Jufari, who trembled in front of her. "All your power, and this is the best you can do?" The Sandaway raised his chin, giving her a defiant look while he struggled against the thin tendrils of power holding him in place. It was good enough for your protector, for the woman I killed when I took you. At the mention of her aunt, something within her snapped, and with a fierce growl, Vesper lifted him off the ground while snapping her palm open, causing his arms and legs to splay wide like they were being pulled in all directions. Her name was Magda, said Vesper through gritted teeth, pulling harder. She watched with grim satisfaction as his body trembled, every muscle shaking, his bones and tendons cracking. And she was a good person, kind and loving. And she deserved better than to die by your hand. Despite the agony etched on his face, a grim cackle escaped from Jufari's throat. A filthy oath witch like her, he said with a strained voice. She deserved it. In fact, if I look, I'm sure she. If you look, she is out there, standing with the rest of the damned. You'll join her soon enough, said Vesper, wrenching control of the shadowy spear he had created, flipping it around and driving its razor-sharp tip ever so slowly into Jufari's heaving chest, sending thin rivulets of blood rolling down his sides. Jufari's eyes went wide with disbelief when the dark weapon pierced his skin, his lips twisting into a horrible grimace while the tip inched ever so slowly through breastbone. If you kill me, you will damn yourself to this place, he screamed, but I can take you home. Set you free. I know you lie. And I know the way home lies through your death, she said, closing her fist, pouring all of her anger and hurt through the spear, using it as a beacon for every ounce of rage in her heart. No, shouted Jufari, wildly shaking his head. The loe that rides you will never let you go now that it has a taste of you. The Sandaway let out a blood-curdling scream that turned into a sickening wet rattle when the spear at last ripped through his chest, plunging past bone and flesh like it was papyrus. It's not enough, whispered Vesper, her anger raging as images of Magda's death played again and again in her mind. With a roar she wove more threads of power into the floating body, light and dark, fire and ice. With a final surge she separated the Sandaway into his basic elements, banishing his soul to live among the damned, while draining every ounce of blood. The rest she unleashed her wrath, burning it until all that was left was ash floating on the wind, flesh and bone transformed into its purest essence, before letting it drift away in the dark until nothing was left. When it was at last done, she let out a trembling breath, her body shivering with exhaustion as she fell to her knees with her head bowed, tears rolling down her cheeks. She wasn't sure how long she sat there in the dark, but when she came to her senses, she was numb from cold, and her legs were tingling from having fallen asleep. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her mother was still there. She could feel the faint buzz that was Lilith, raging against the walls of the prison Vesper had created, hunting for some way to escape, waiting to take control once more. Time to go home, said Vesper, her eyes locked on what was left of Jufari, a perfectly smooth crimson orb that floated in front of her. Standing on trembling legs, she looked back and forth along the cobblestone path and pressed her lips together, doubt bubbling in her stomach. When she had been battling for control with Lilith, the knowledge her mother possessed flowed freely into her mind, but now that she had locked her away, it felt distant, like she was trying to remember something she had learned long ago. For a moment she was tempted to weaken the prison that separated them. It would have been easy enough to access the knowledge of the way home from Lilith directly, but she wasn't sure if she could control her, and the last thing she wanted to do was face her mother again in her exhausted state. Looking down at the ash that was once Papa Jufari, it came back to her in fits and starts and she began the ritual that would take her home. Raising a hand over her head she squeezed hard, opening up the cut that was there. Sucking in a deep breath she began, drawing on the twin streams of power, some from her own blood, some from his, and more from the dark depths of this place. The cobblestone path remained eerily silent, And for a moment Vesper thought she had made a mistake and failed to do the ritual properly, but in the span of a single breath a hot fetid wind blew across the barren plain, and she sensed that the new Loe was present. Wrapping it in her power, she commanded it, dominating it to her will so that it would lead her home. The cobblestone path began to glow with an amber light, and she could see a faint ghostly outline of Jufari, leading her back the way they had come, beckoning that she should follow, his face a mask of hatred, even in death. Following the fallen Sandaway spirit down the dark path, she was struck by the absurdity of it all. Jufari had never met her or anyone in her family, yet he hated her and all of the O's even to the detriment of his own life. His hate had been his doom. Vesper's life had been upended because of some forgotten wrong, lost to the annals of time, all that anger and violence for nothing. Nothing had changed except that her world was smaller. Now she and her people, if there were any left, would have to rebuild from the ashes. She only prayed that she would be strong enough. She had gained power at a terrible price, more power than she ever imagined having. As if thinking of her made her stronger. Vesper clutched her head, despair washing over her as she felt like a spike had been driven into her skull. Lilith raged in the back of her mind, fighting to escape the prison Vesper had created. While the pain ran through her, she worried that she would not be able to contain her mother's corruption, or worse, that given time, she would fall to the same evils. She was about to give in to despair when she remembered Magda's sacrifice. Her aunt had taken Jufari's spear to the chest so that Vesper could live. She couldn't fail her, she wouldn't. Gathering her will, Vesper clenched her teeth and pushed back against Lilith's onslaught, bringing it to heel. This was her body and mind, her spirit, and she would not lose control of it ever again. Within moments the pain returned to the faint buzz it had been before. Getting to her feet, Vesper let out a shaking breath, knowing now that each day would be a struggle, but if she could hold back Lilith's rage, she could turn her mother's evil into a force for good. Setting off after the dark spirit, she quickened her pace, a smile creasing her face when she understood at last, feeling that something good had come from all of this. She would spend the rest of her days making the world a better place. She would do the one thing that would make her people great again. She would give them hope, and for now, she prayed it would be enough.